The crash had been 3 weeks ago, but Cale Morrison still woke every morning expecting to see Earth's familiar blue sky. Instead, crimson clouds swirled overhead like dried blood, and the alien sun cast everything in shades of amber and rust. His emergency pod lay twisted and useless among the crystalline trees, its distress beacon long since dead. Survival had become routine. Check the perimeter, maintain the shelter, set the traps. The snares were crude but effective, twisted metal from his pod woven with fibrous vines that grew everywhere on this forsaken world. Small creatures scurried through the undergrowth, mouse-like things with too many legs and chittering calls. They tasted like rubber and sadness, but they kept him alive. Cale crept through the morning mist toward his furthest trap, a crossbow fashioned from salvaged materials held ready. The forest here grew denser, the crystalline bark humming with an energy that made his teeth ache. Something had triggered the snare. He could see the bent sapling from 50 meters away. What he found made him freeze. Caught in the wire noose was something unlike the scuttling prey he'd grown accustomed to. Roughly the size of a large cat, it had midnight blue fur that seemed to absorb light, and when it turned toward him, twin orbs of silver fire gazed from its angular face. Not the compound eyes of the local fauna, but something achingly familiar, something almost human. The creature was injured, dark fluid matting its fur where the snare had cut deep. It trembled as Cale approached, those impossible eyes tracking his every movement. He raised his knife. Protein was protein, and he couldn't afford sentiment. That's when it spoke. Please. The voice was soft, melodic, unmistakably feminine. Don't eat me. Kyle stumbled backward, nearly dropping his weapon. The creature, no, the being, watched him with those luminous eyes, and he saw intelligence there. Fear. Hope. Before he could process what was happening, the air around the trapped figure began to shimmer like heat waves. The midnight fur rippled and dissolved, the quadruped form stretching upward. In seconds, a young woman knelt where the creature had been, still caught in his snare but undeniably, impossibly human in shape. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, pale violet skin marked with darker patterns like living tattoos, silver hair that seemed to move of its own accord, and those same burning eyes now set in a face that could have been carved by angels with unconventional tastes. She wore simple clothing that looked grown rather than woven, and she was clearly hurt. Dark blood, surprisingly red, seeping from where the wire had cut her arm. "You're not one of them," she whispered, her accent carrying musical notes he'd never heard. "You're different. What are you?" Kyle managed, though his throat felt like sandpaper. "My name is Vera." She tried to shift position and winced. My people call ourselves the Cathara. We're not from this world." "Neither are you," Cale thought but didn't say. Instead, he found himself kneeling beside the snare, his knife forgotten. Up close, he could see exhaustion in every line of her body, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of running for far too long. "The raiders," she continued, watching his face with those unsettling eyes. "They hunt us. I thought you were one of them. When I sensed your traps, I tried to hide, to become something small and unnoticed." She gestured weakly at herself. It didn't work very well. Cale's hands shook slightly as he worked to free the wire from Vera's arm. The metal had bitten deep, and her violet skin felt fever-warm under his calloused fingers. She didn't flinch, but he caught the way her breath hitched when he pulled the snare away. "This needs cleaning," he said, more to himself than to her. "Can you walk?" Vera nodded, though when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Without thinking, Cale caught her around the waist, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. She was solid, real, and very much alive. Not the hallucination his lonely mind might have conjured. "I'm sorry," she whispered, leaning against him more heavily than she probably wanted to. "The transformation. It takes energy I don't have." The walk back to his shelter felt like kilometers, though it was barely one. Vera's weight against his side was distracting in ways he couldn't afford, especially when her hair brushed his cheek and carried a scent like rain on summer stones. She stumbled twice, and each time his arm tightened around her protectively, His shelter was crude but functional, metal sheeting from the pod propped against a cluster of crystal trees, with a fire pit and water collection system. Vera's eyes widened as she took it in. You built this? Alone? Had to. Kyle helped her settle on his makeshift bedroll, then rummaged through his medical supplies. Hold still. As he cleaned her wound, she told him about her people. The Cathera were telepathic empaths, she explained, evolved from a world where violence was unknown. They could sense emotions, even influence them to some degree, but their pacifist nature made them helpless against aggression. The Raiders discovered our homeworld 50 cycles ago, Vera said, her voice hollow. They hunt us for our abilities. Telepaths make valuable slaves, you see. We can read thoughts, predict behavior, break the will of their enemies. Cal's hands stilled on the bandage he was wrapping. How many of you are left? I don't know. Scattered across the galaxy, hiding wherever we can. She met his eyes. I've been running for 3 years. 3 years. Cal tried to imagine that kind of existence. Never safe, never able to rest, always looking over your shoulder. His own isolation suddenly seemed like luxury. Why didn't you read my mind? He asked. No, I wasn't a threat. A flush darkened her violet cheeks. I tried, but you're different. Your thoughts are shielded somehow, like they're wrapped in static. I can only sense your emotions, and even those are muted. She paused, then added more softly, though I can feel your loneliness, it's like an echo of my own. The admission hung between them, too honest and raw for comfort. Cal busied himself with securing the bandage, but he could feel her eyes on him. Thank you, Vera said, for choosing mercy. Don't thank me yet. We're both trapped on this rock, and I barely have enough supplies for one person. But, even as he said it, Cal was already mentally cataloging what they'd need. More snares, better shelter, a way to extend their water supply. When had he started thinking in terms of we? As if sensing his thoughts, and maybe she could a little, Vera reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool despite the fever heat of her skin. I can help, she said. I know things about surviving. My people may be pacifists, but we're not helpless. The contact sent warmth racing up his arm, and for a moment Cal forgot about practical concerns. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness? Years, maybe. The realization made something tight in his chest loosen. Rest, he said gruffly, pulling his hand away before he did something stupid. We'll figure out the details, tomorrow. But as Vera settled into his bedroll and he prepared to spend another night on the hard ground, Kyle found himself watching the rise and fall of her breathing. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was hope, proof that he wasn't alone in this vast, hostile universe. Outside, something howled in the distance, and Vera's eyes snapped open, meeting his across the dim shelter. They're close, she whispered. And for the first time since the crash, Cal had something more precious than his own life to protect. The signs appeared on the 4th day after Vera's arrival. Kyle noticed them first. Scorched patches in the crystal forest where no natural fire could have burned, and strange geometric cuts in the bark that looked deliberate. Methodical. They're mapping the area, Vera said when he showed her the markings. Her face had gone pale, those silver eyes wide with recognition. The Raiders, they always start this way. Systematic searches, closing the net slowly. Cal's jaw tightened. How long do we have? Days, maybe less. She wrapped her arms around herself, the gesture so vulnerable it made something protective. Flare in his chest. They must have tracked my energy signature when I shifted forms. I'm sorry, Cal. I've brought death to your doorstep. Hey. He stepped closer, close enough to catch her unique scent, close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide. We'll figure this out. But privately, Cal wasn't sure how. His makeshift weapons might handle the local wildlife, but actual raiders? He'd seen the aftermath of their work in the deeper parts of the forest. Trees melted to glass, ground fused into unnatural patterns. Whatever technology they possessed was far beyond anything in his salvaged arsenal. That evening, as they reinforced their shelter with additional metal plating, Vera moved differently around him. Closer. Her hand would brush his when passing tools, her body would press against his back when they worked in the cramped space. Each contact sent electricity through him, and he began to suspect it wasn't entirely accidental. "Vera," he said finally, catching her wrist as she reached past him for the third time in 5 minutes. "What are you doing?" She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned in the small space until they were face to face, barely an arm's length apart. In the firelight, her skin seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. "I can feel what you're not saying," she whispered. "Your emotions, they're so strong, even through whatever shields your mind naturally. Desire, longing, but also fear, not of the raiders, but of this. Of me." Her free hand came up to touch his chest, right over his hammering heart. "I feel the same way." Cale's breath caught. "Vera, we barely know each other, and with the raiders coming, especially because they're coming." Her voice was fierce now, determined. "Do you know what it's been like? 3 years of running, of never allowing myself to feel anything but fear, never letting anyone close, because they always leave or die or betray me." She stepped closer, eliminating the last inch between them. "But you chose mercy when you could have chosen survival. You've shared your food, your shelter, your protection, even though it cost you. You see me as a person, not a thing to be used." Her other hand came up to frame his face, and Kyle felt his careful control wavering. "If we're going to die, I don't want to die without knowing what this could be." The kiss was inevitable, had been building since that first moment when she'd shifted from creature to woman. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of the sweet water they'd been sharing. When she pressed closer, her body fitting against his like it belonged there, Kyle's last reservations crumbled. His arms came around her, one hand tangling in that impossible silver hair while the other splayed across the small of her back. She made a soft sound against his mouth, part relief and part hunger, and it undid him completely. They sank onto the bedroll together, hands exploring with desperate urgency. Vera's violet skin was silk under his calloused palms, and when he traced the darker patterns that marked her shoulders and arms, she arched beneath him with a gasp that sent fire through his veins. "I can feel everything you're feeling," she breathed against his throat. "Your wonder, your desire, it's beautiful." Her clothes seemed to dissolve at her touch, that same shimmer effect from her transformation, while his required more conventional removal. When skin met skin, the sensation was electric, as if her alien nature carried a literal charge. They made love with the desperate intensity of people who might not see another dawn, but underneath the urgency was something deeper. Connection that went beyond physical need. When Vera cried out his name, her nails digging into his shoulders, Cale felt something fundamental shift inside him. Afterward, they lay entwined in the flickering firelight, her head on his chest and his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare arm. For the first time in weeks, the hostile world outside seemed distant and manageable. "Whatever happens," Vera murmured, her breath warm against his skin. "I'm glad I found you." Cale was about to respond when a sound froze them both, the unmistakable whine of advanced engines overhead. Through the gaps in their shelter, harsh white light stabbed down, sweeping back and forth in search patterns. Vera's body went rigid against his. "They're here." The attack came at dawn. Cale woke to the screaming whine of energy weapons slicing through crystal trees like they were paper. Vera was already moving, her body tense with terror as she pressed against the back wall of their shelter. "3 of them," she whispered, her eyes unfocused as she reached out with her telepathic senses. "Scouts, they're... Oh gods, Cale, their minds are so full of violence, they enjoy this." "Stay down." Cale grabbed his crossbow and the makeshift spear he'd crafted from pod debris. "Whatever happens, don't come out." But even as he said it, he knew how hopeless this was. His primitive weapons against energy rifles? He might as well throw rocks at a hurricane. The first raider appeared at the shelter entrance like something from a nightmare. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall, with elongated limbs and gray-green skin marked by ritual scarification. Its face was hidden behind a breathing apparatus, but the eyes that glared through the visor burned with cruel intelligence. Kale's crossbow bolt took its center mass, but the quarrel simply bounced off some kind of personal shielding. The raider's weapon swung toward him, energy crackling along its length. Then Vera screamed, not in fear but in fury, and the raider stumbled, clutching its head. Whatever she'd done to its mind gave Kale the opening he needed. He lunged forward, with his spear, driving the improvised weapon up under the creature's jaw where the armor was weakest. Dark blood sprayed as the raider collapsed, but two more were already flanking their position. Kale spun to face them, knowing he was too slow, too exposed. The energy blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the shelter wall. Pain exploded through his body, the smell of burned flesh filling his nostrils. Through the haze of agony, he saw Vera rising to her feet, her silver hair whipping around her face like a storm. "You want me?" She snarled at the raiders, her voice carrying harmonics that made Kale's bones ache. "Then face me." What happened next defied everything she'd told him about her pacifist nature. Vera's eyes blazed like twin stars as she reached into the raiders' minds, and their confident advance faltered. One began firing wildly, his shots going wide as some internal torment made him writhe. The other dropped his weapon entirely, hands pressed to his temples as he screamed. But the effort was costing her. Blood began trickling from her nose and her legs shook with the strain. Kyle forced himself up despite the fire in his shoulder, grabbing the fallen raider's weapon. The energy rifle was heavier than it looked, its controls alien but intuitive. He managed to fire just as the second raider broke free of Vera's mental assault. The blast caught the creature in the chest, punching through its armor in a spray of sparks and gore. The third raider was still writhing on the ground when Vera finally released her hold on its mind. It looked up at them with eyes full of madness and rage, reaching for a sidearm. Kale's second shot ended the threat permanently. In the sudden silence, they stared at each other across the carnage. Vera's face was streaked with blood and tears, her body trembling with exhaustion. Kyle's shoulder felt like molten metal, but he was alive. They were both alive. "I broke my vows," she whispered, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. "My people. We don't kill. We don't hurt others, not even in self-defense. It's what makes us who we are. You saved my life." Kyle stumbled toward her, his good arm reaching out. "Vera, you saved both our lives." When he touched her face, she collapsed against him, sobbing. He held her as tightly as his injured shoulder would allow, feeling her shake apart in his arms. "I can feel them dying," she gasped. "Their thoughts, their pain. It's all mixed up with mine. How do you bear it? How do you live with causing death?" "By remembering what you're protecting," Kale said softly, stroking her hair. "By knowing that some things are worth fighting for." They spent the next hour treating each other's wounds. The energy burn on Kyle's shoulder was severe but not fatal, while Vera's nosebleed had stopped, though she still looked drained. As she bandaged his injury with strips torn from their bedding, her hands were gentle, reverent. "The scouts will be missed eventually," she said. "More will come. Then we'd better be ready." Kale tested his range of motion, wincing. "Can you use their equipment?" Vera nodded toward the fallen weapons. "Their technology is partially psionic. I can interface with it, though it feels wrong, corrupted." As the alien sun climbed higher, they worked together to salvage what they could from the raiders' gear. Energy weapons, personal shields, a communication device that might help them call for rescue. But more than the equipment, something had changed between them. When Vera's fingers lingered on his uninjured arm as she helped him into the salvaged armor vest, the touch was different, deeper. When he caught her watching him with those luminous eyes, he saw not just desire but something approaching reverence. "I understand now," she said as they prepared their defenses for the next assault. "Why my people fell so easily to these monsters. We were so focused on preserving our purity that we forgot." Sometimes love requires you to fight. That evening, as they took shelter in a deeper cave they'd found, Vera came to him again. But this time there was no desperation in her touch, only a profound tenderness. When she kissed him, it tasted like promises and forever. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she whispered against his lips, "know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." Outside their refuge, something howled in the distance, bigger than the scout ships, hungrier. The main hunting party had arrived. The war party descended like a plague of locusts, their massive ship blotting out the alien sun. From their hidden cave, Kale and Vera watched through the salvaged scope as dozens of raiders poured from the vessel's belly. Not just scouts this time, but full battle units with heavy weapons and siege equipment. "They're not taking chances," Vera whispered, her face pale as she reached out with her abilities. "The commander, his mind is like a fortress of hate. He's been hunting my people for decades." Kale adjusted the energy rifle's settings, his shoulder still aching from yesterday's wound. "How many?" "Too many." Vera's voice cracked. "Kale, we can't fight them all. Maybe I should surrender. Let them take me. You could..." "No." His voice was iron. "We've come too far for that." They'd spent the night preparing, turning their cave into a fortress with salvaged equipment and improvised explosives. The narrow entrance would force the raiders to come at them one or two at a time. But even so, the odds were impossible. "There's something else," Vera said, not meeting his eyes. "Something I haven't told you. My abilities, they're not just telepathy. Under extreme stress, my people can create what we call a mind storm. It's a psychic shockwave that can disable or kill every thinking being in a wide radius." Kale felt ice form in his stomach. But it would likely kill me too. And she looked at him with those luminous eyes. "It would affect you as well. I can't shield you from it. Not completely." The sound of approaching boots echoed through the cave system. They were out of time. "Do it," Kale said without hesitation. "Kale, no. Listen to me." He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. 3 weeks ago, I was a dead man walking. Alone, hopeless, waiting to die on this rock. You changed that. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to live. If this is how it ends, then at least we go together. Tears streamed down her violet cheeks. "I love you. I love you too." He kissed her fiercely, tasting salt and sorrow and something indefinably sweet. "Now let's show these bastards what happens when they threaten our family." The first wave of raiders hit their barricades, like a storm surge. Kale's salvaged rifle carved through their ranks, while Vera used her abilities to turn their own weapons against them. But for every raider that fell, 2 more took their place. A thermal grenade exploded near their position, showering them with molten rock. Kale felt shrapnel tear through his leg, but he kept firing. His world narrowed to the next target, the next threat. Then the commander appeared, a towering figure in ornate armor, his scarred face twisted with cruel satisfaction. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority and madness. "Little telepath," he called out in accented but clear standard. "You've caused me considerable trouble, but the hunt ends here." His weapon was massive, clearly designed to punch through heavy armor. When he fired, their barricade simply ceased to exist. Kale threw himself over Vera as debris rained down, feeling something sharp tear across his back. "Now," Vera whispered. "I have to do it now." "Wait." Kale struggled to his feet, raising his rifle. "One more try." But the commander's armor absorbed the energy blast without effect. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and raised his weapon again. That's when Vera stood up. Her eyes were no longer silver, but pure white, blazing with an inner light that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Her hair whipped around her face, as power gathered around her like a visible storm. "You want to hunt my people?" Her voice echoed with harmonics that made reality shiver. Then face the fury of a species you've tried to exterminate. The psychic shockwave erupted outward like a nuclear blast made of pure thought. Every raider in the cave system collapsed instantly, their minds simply switched off. The commander's awe, triumphant expression froze, then cracked, then dissolved into vacant confusion before he toppled like a felled tree. But the effort was too much. Vera's legs buckled, blood streaming from her nose and ears. Kale caught her as she fell, his own, mind reeling from the psychic backlash. Did we get them all? She gasped. Yeah. Kyle held her close, feeling her heartbeat growing weaker. You got them all. Good. She smiled, her eyes flickering back to their normal silver. The ship, you can use their ship to get home. We can use it, he corrected. Together. For a moment he thought he'd lost her. Her breathing grew so shallow he could barely detect it. But then her eyes opened again, focusing on his face with obvious effort. Together, she whispered. The raider ship was a marvel of technology, its systems partially psionic in nature. With Vera's guidance, Kale managed to activate the medical bay, where alien healing technology slowly repaired their wounds. The navigation system showed dozens of star charts, but one in particular caught their attention, a remote system marked with symbols that made Vera gasp. That's a Kethera marker, she said, her voice wondering. There's a colony there, survivors. Then that's where we're going. Kale wrapped his arms around her from behind as she worked the controls. Time to take you home. Home, Vera repeated, leaning back against his chest. I'd forgotten what that word meant. As their stolen ship lifted away from the crystal world that had nearly become their grave, Kyle looked out at the star field ahead. Somewhere out there was a new life, a new beginning. Somewhere out there they'd have time to explore this thing between them without the constant threat of death. What happens now? Vera asked, her fingers intertwined with his. Now? Kyle smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Now we live. Behind them, the hostile world fell away into darkness. Ahead lay the infinite possibilities of a galaxy, full of worlds to explore, peoples to meet, and a love that had survived the worst the universe could throw at them. Together, they sailed toward the stars. The end.